Less than a week ago, a friend of mine visited me here in Edinburgh, and I did the full tourist experience. We wandered around, and one of the places that I brought her was St. Giles Cathedral on the Royal Mile, which is probably the most extravagant and most beautiful cathedral here in the city. It's certainly the most popular for the tourists. It's right on the Royal Mile, which is the street that runs down from the castle. So you can imagine it gets completely overrun with tourists. But it is absolutely stunning. And we were kind of having this conversation when we walked in the doors. It was quite an intense conversation, actually. But as soon as we walked in, I was kind of facing back towards the door and my friend was facing out towards the cathedral. And as soon as we walked in, mid-sentence, she just sort of broke off, and just this look of complete captivation just came over her face, and that was it. The conversation was over. And it really reminded me of how I felt the first time I walked into that space. And I had the wonderful feeling of turning around and looking and seeing it through her eyes, seeing it as though for the first time again. St. Giles Cathedral is one of a couple of cathedrals that I have been in the habit of going into pretty regularly since moving to Edinburgh. Maybe not as much in recent years, sadly. I think when I first moved here I was better at doing sightseeing and going to different places and not just kind of getting into a rut. But I really felt this strong urge to start going back there more frequently. It's right beside where I go to university. It's really not hard for me to just pop in while on a break. And so we went over to this alcove where you can light candles and write down a prayer and add it to a basket, that kind of thing. And I decided to light a candle, and I only had a £5 note in my wallet, so I put the £5 note in, and usually I'd give about £1 for a candle. And I thought, right, okay, well, I'm going to have to come back 4 more times to get my money's worth, and I'm really glad that I'm going to do that. Cathedrals have been impressive to me probably ever since I was a small child. I don't remember the first time I was in, say, a Catholic church, but I can definitely remember a sense of awe and wonder from a very young age. And possibly the first cathedrals I saw were in France. Because we visited northern France, me and my parents, when I was about 4 years old, maybe 5, and we definitely would have seen some cathedrals there. So maybe that was even the first time that I could remember seeing a church, and certainly anything as grand as a cathedral. And ever since then, I only have to walk in and I immediately sort of get this sense of reverence and wonder and peace and silence. And it's kind of different to those kind of experiences or feelings that I have, say, at the altar or in meditation or in ritual or anything like that, because it connects me to other people in a way that my solitary practice doesn't. It connects me to all the people who have worshipped in that cathedral over time. It connects me to the people who built it, the people who made the stained glass windows, who did the sculpture, the people who have just over hundreds of years, and sometimes up to 1,000 years or more, trodden those floorboards and looked up into this space and felt something. And to the compulsion that drew people to create these spaces in the first place. And all of this is why I was so devastated when Notre Dame went up in flames on Monday. I was really, really gutted. I was shocked at my own kind of response. I remember when I saw the fire at first, it just didn't really sink in, and it wasn't until a couple of hours later my parents got in touch with me and said, have you seen about Notre Dame being on fire? And I said, yeah, I've seen that. It looked quite bad. And then I kind of went on the news and saw the video of the spire up in flames and collapsing down. And I started to cry. It was really a surprising reaction to me, and miles away in Ireland, my dad was having a very similar reaction to me. He was saying, I can't look at any more of this, it's too upsetting. And I mean, part of it was a very selfish sadness, in that my first thought was, I haven't seen it yet. I had 30 years to go to Paris and see Notre Dame, and I didn't take that opportunity. I never went. I haven't been there yet, and this kind of sense of entitlement and one of these kind of major places, major sites of beauty in Europe that I could have so easily gone and seen. But it's also, I think it also runs deeper. It's just this kind of sadness on behalf of everybody who will not see it the way that it used to be. And all of the people who are used to seeing it in their everyday lives in Paris, people who live there, French people all across the country who just feel like a part of their country is now gone, is now not as it used to be. And, you know, that taps into all sorts of kind of feelings of just what we can do as humans and what we can achieve when we work together and how we build up our sense of identity based on, and I don't think it's just about symbols of power. I think it's more about symbols of unity and symbols of the feelings that we have as humans, the feelings that we feel are universal to us as human beings. And I really think that a lot of that is what comes into play when people have such a visceral reaction to this kind of thing happening. Because it's not only a work of art, it also is a place of worship, a place of reverence. And whether or not you are Christian or are religious at all, you've almost certainly had an experience like what I described my friend having when she walked into the cathedral in Edinburgh. You've almost certainly had an experience of awe, an experience of remembering that there are things in the world that are bigger than you. And remembering just the universality. Is that a word? That's not a word. Universalism, the universal human experience of having that feeling, of feeling like there's something bigger, of feeling like there is something meaningful or even purposeful to this world, to this universe. And places like Notre Dame, yes, they were built by institutions of great power. A lot of money went into them and they are maintained by the same money and power, and I've seen some negative things going on, you know, on social media about Notre Dame and the fire and people's reactions to it, but that's not how I see it. I don't see the Catholic Church necessarily when I look at Notre Dame. I see the hands of the people who built it, you know? I see people bowed in prayer and feeling certain things and that motivating them to create these wonderful spaces. And I'm never going to deny that particularly, you know, powerful traditional religious institutions are not driven by power because, you know, unfortunately, inevitably, a lot of the time they are. But they're also driven by something else because, I mean, let's face it, we are living in kind of a secular age in Europe. Generally speaking, the accepted truth is secular. What we accept as undeniable truth, generally speaking, is science, and there isn't so much room for religion being this sort of monopoly, of having this monopoly of truth. And yet so many of us are still religious, so many of us still partake in those kinds of rituals. I do think that for many, many people, Christianity has become obsolete and the traditional rituals are no longer really valid or hold meaning for people, and because they are outdated and because they come from a time when we did have different kinds of beliefs and different kind of culture. But for me, I think beautiful artworks in the name of reverence will always be meaningful to me on a very spiritual level. And I was just so relieved when I got up the next morning to discover that at least one of the beautiful rose windows in Notre Dame has been preserved. And ultimately, the power of the church is what made these kind of beautiful artworks and pieces of architecture possible. It was the patronage of these powerful, wealthy people that made it possible for artists to create what they did. And, you know, I can't even imagine what percentage, say, of a city like Rome would even exist in terms of its cultural and artistic artifacts if it weren't for the power and money that the church has wielded. So, you know, it's a complicated topic, but that's kind of my take on cathedrals, and that's kind of a little bit of insight into how I feel in them and my experiences of them. So when I talk about spiritual experiences I've had in cathedrals and the way that they evoke a certain feeling in me pretty consistently, that's kind of what I mean. When I talk about spiritual experience more generally, it's really just a vague kind of concept that I have developed in association with various different kinds of practices and locations and kinds of things that I do and read and feel, and it's really nothing very concrete. But I think what's unique about, for me, the kind of cathedral experience is, it's a feeling of reverence in the same way that I feel when I sit at the altar, when I do these various different things. It really is just a call to remembering something greater than me, whether that is belief in the divinity of cosmos, whether it's just society in general, whether it's just the size and scope of the world and the universe. It's also lots of different things, but being in a cathedral, sometimes even just because of its physical space, the amount of space between the ceiling and the floor, that also just brings about this feeling of expansiveness. But also, as I say, it connects me to other people and to a line of history of other people feeling the same thing. And that, to me, is really valuable. And I'm really glad that I'm privileged enough to be able to travel around the world and to see these amazing places, whether it's in Rome or Paris or anywhere else in the world. I always enjoy going to different religious spaces and seeing the beautiful art that has been created in them. Because to me, it's a unique kind of feeling. To me, it's a type of art that is different to other kinds of art, and it's, it's not a hard and fast distinction, but it's something that brings a particular kind of feeling about in me, and that will always be important to me.